As we begin, we want to look at a model of man that comes from 1 Thessalonians 5:23, where Paul talks about us having a spirit and a soul and a body. Now, there's some disagreement over exactly how man is made up, and we just want to divide him into three parts so it's understandable for us. And again, we want to move to the greater truth as we look at that. But we know from Genesis that man was made out of the dust of the earth. God breathed His Spirit, and he became a living soul with mind and will and emotions. The first question I would ask you is, why did God create you? Why did He create man? Why does He even want man? Well, 1 John 4:8 gives us a clue. It tells us there that God is love. If you are love, you have to have something you can love. So you've become the object of God's love. There are no insignificant people in the whole world. It's a miracle that you're here today. And Ray will talk to us just how it pleased God to have each one of us. He desires everyone in this room, and He's love. To make sure that I come to Him so He can love me, He put in me certain spiritual needs that only God can meet. And so in my spirit, He put the need to be loved by God, to be accepted, to have His assurance, to have His security, to have His total commitment, and also to be significant to Him. Those are needs that are all spiritual needs that only God can meet. Adam and Eve are told, the day you eat from the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, that day you'll die. So they ate of the tree. God said, if you eat it, you'll die. Did they die? They kept moving in their bodies. They kept thinking and feeling and doing. Where did the death take place? In their spirit. At that point, they were dead to God in the spirit. And here's the problem. There's no way now for me to get my deep spiritual needs met. I was created to have those needs met, and I can't move ahead until those needs are met. I have to have those if I'm going to function. In the same way, all of you in this room need water. You can't move ahead if you don't have water. Now, what are you going to do if you go very many days without water? I can remember growing up in high school being a wrestler and having to lose a lot of weight so I could wrestle. And one time, to get the extra pounds off, I went, I think it was 10 days without a drink. And I was sucking on ice at night when I'd wake up in the middle of the night because I couldn't sleep without the water. As soon as I weighed in, I went and took a drink. Do you know that ever since that day, whenever I've been down at a water fountain, I remember what that felt like, to not have water. We need water or we can't go on. And if you've gone 10 days without water and you come up to me and say, Mike, I'm miserable, I need water, and I hand you a broom handle and say, suck on this, does that help? It doesn't help at all. We try then to get spiritual needs, since we're dead to God in the Spirit, met in other things and in other people. But they can't meet spiritual needs. It's like sucking on the broom handle. It's just not going to happen. And yet we continue to go to others to get those needs met because we're dead to God in the Spirit, and we're driven in that we can't move ahead until those needs are met. The first problem that we have then, being born dead to God in the Spirit, is that we're completely self-centered. All that matters is me. I can't move ahead until my needs are met. I would challenge you to find a single instance of conflict with another person that doesn't have this at its roots in either you or the other person. You didn't meet my need. You didn't accept me. You didn't love me. You didn't give me assurance. You're not committed to me. And what we begin to do then is look for these needs and attempt to get them met from the outside in. All religion is, and all men are religious because we're all created to have a God. We're created for God. We're created incomplete, and we're not complete until we're in Him. So everyone's driven to find something to worship that will meet these needs. If God isn't meeting those needs, then we look to others. We look to the world. We look to our job. We look to our body, how it looks, what we can do with it, in our mind, will, or emotions. And if we look in the area of the Spirit, we'll always be looking in darkness to try to find the answer, because we're dead to God in the Spirit. I had a really great conversation with a fellow in Auckland that I found interesting. He was a Buddhist monk for 25 years. He'd come to Auckland to study Bible. He was at the highest level of the monastery in Korea. His job was to translate original Buddhist Chinese documents into Korean. And one of the things that he discovered in the documents when he was translating them is the statue of Buddha is prohibited, which was an interesting find. But he said to me, in my meditations, 25 years as a monk, in those meditations, I saw the very gate of heaven. But as I walked toward it, there was a huge chasm between me and it. And I couldn't get there. And that's when I began to look to Jesus. And he'd come to the Lord. And you know, he was an interesting fellow. I'd really like you to pray for him. His name is Kim. He isn't leaving the monastery. He's going back. And he said, I want to see the people at the highest levels come to Christ. Wouldn't that be something? If that took place? But you look in the Spirit as your religion, and even there, you're not going to find the answers. We try to milk out of others what they can't give us. My father used to say this to me all the time growing up. You know, Mike, it is technically possible to milk a mouse. I'm just not sure it's worth all the effort and you get enough to drink. Well, he's right. When we're trying to get spiritual needs met and the things around us, we're milking mice. And do we ever get all that we need? I was explaining this to a couple in Oklahoma, that they're trying to milk spiritual needs out of each other, and it was absolutely impossible to ever have that happen. And the lady says to me, I think I understand what you're saying. We're just two ticks and no dog. And I said, that's exactly right. You're two ticks and no dog. There's no way for you to get what you need from each other. A tick can't latch onto a tick. There's nothing there. It's got to latch onto something else. And we see a lot of things that people do that are attempts to get these needs met. Do you know the person that's always depressed? No matter when you see them, they're depressed. Oh, life is terrible. I can't talk about it. It's all just too bad. And we all put our arm around them. Do you think they're putting on that little show for free? They're getting acceptance out of that. They're getting attention. Do you know the person in high school, as I always was, always cutting up and fooling around and doing this and that? Do you think that's put on for free? That's to try to milk acceptance and attention out of other people. All of those things are just religions. I remember a lady telling me that in 1 month she'd been to bed with over 10 men. I said, what is the point? Do you enjoy that? Is that the kind of person you are? Is that what you want to be? And I kept pressing her on the point, and finally she said this to me. I just want somebody to hold me and tell me they love me, even if they're drunk and lying. And what had really become her religion was sex. It was an attempt to get those needs met from the outside in. So we can look at the variety of religions that are out there. All of these things are attempts to get a spiritual need met from the outside in. Here's the unique thing about Christianity. It meets my need from the inside out. There was a little girl in India, and she said to her grandmother who'd given her a jigsaw puzzle of the world. The little girl's trying to put together this jigsaw puzzle, and finally she gives up and she says this, Grandma, I can't put the puzzle together. I don't know where the pieces go. It's too hard. I just can't put it together. It doesn't fit. And Grandma came over and said, well, let me show you a secret. She grabbed the puzzle and she turned it over, and on the other side of the puzzle was a picture of Jesus with his arms out. And the little girl said, I know that picture. I've seen that picture before. I can do that quickly. And she quickly took all the pieces and she put them together. And she got all done and said, Grandma, look how fast I did it. I did the picture of Jesus. And the grandmother came over and said, now let me show you a secret. And she took the puzzle, turned it upside down, and the whole world had come together. And that's the secret. When Christ comes together, the whole world comes together. When my need is met in here, all the other needs find their proper place. They all come together. They're where they ought to be. If you want to go trekking in the jungles of Africa, there's no trails and there's no maps, so you have to hire a guide. So if you're in the northeast of Africa, you want to go through those jungles, you get a guide. The interesting thing is, when you translate the guide's name into English, he's called the Way. The way through the jungle isn't a trail or a map. The way is a person. And the way through life isn't a trail and it's not a map, but it's a person. He meets my needs then from the inside out. Now let me say this about that. God meets my spiritual needs so I don't try to meet and milk those needs out of people around me and get frustrated. But does God meet all my needs? He does, but He meets them through other people. And I want to be clear on that point. A girl said to me in my office the other day, she was really depressed, and she says, you know, if I were closer to the Lord, I wouldn't have any needs whatsoever. I wouldn't need anybody. I'd be perfectly content, lonely. If I was just closer to the Lord, I'd be completely content. And I looked at her and said, well, sister, someday are you planning on having a baby? She said, oh, yeah. And I said, well, is it going to be an immaculate conception? Is that what you're looking for? Because Jesus meets all your needs. It's going to be immaculate conception? She said, well, no, I guess I'd have to get married. And I said, that's right. There is the need that we have in our mind. We have a need for fellowship. We have a need for communication. We have a need for other people. That's a God-given need. And those things are met from others. But if God's meeting my spiritual needs, I'm not trying to milk it out of other people. And that's the key thing, that out of my innermost being can flow a river of living water. I'm not running around trying to get out of people what they can't give to me. Now, there's certain characteristics of a self-centered person. That's the person that has the spirit cut off. God isn't meeting their needs, and they're trying to milk them out of others. I carry a little list with me, and on this list I've got maybe 100 topics of, 100 descriptions of self-life people. People that are completely consumed with themselves. Somebody got a hold of it and put little green checks by certain words. I don't know what they were trying to tell me. But here's some of the characteristics of self-centered people. They're angry, they're anxious, they're bitter, they blame others, they can't receive compliments, they're compulsive, controlled by their emotions, controlled by doubt. They're critical, they're defensive. They feel sorry for themselves, they gossip, they're greedy, they're guilt-ridden, they're harsh, they hate themselves, they hold grudges, they're hypersensitive, they're impatient, they're impulsive, they're inadequate, they're inferior, they're inhibited, they're insecure, they lack compassion, kindness, love, moderation. They manipulate, they're opinionated, they overbear, they play God, they don't listen. They're proud, they're resentful, they're rude, they're self-absorbed, self-centered, self-motivated, self-reliant, self-righteous, self-sufficient. They're quick to speak, slow to forgive, too subjective, too touchy, unreasonable, unreliable, unsympathetic. And when they hear a list like this, they think all the people that ought to be here to hear it. Now, a friend of mine in England says this: self-centered people are like bad breath, stinking feet, and body odor. It never seems to bother the person that has it, but it's knocking the rest of us out. We can't stand it. When God isn't meeting our needs, all that matters is me getting those needs met from somebody outside me, and I'm completely self-centered. And Paul asked this question in Romans 6:21. It's a great question. What did you gain from all of that? In your self-centeredness and walking around trying to milk out of people what they couldn't give you, and then when they didn't give it to you and you rejected them, what did you gain out of that? It's a good question. In the end, he says this: all you gained out of it is a lot of things that you're even embarrassed to talk about today. I remember a lady saying, I'm very sensitive, so be careful how you talk to me. I said, you're not sensitive, you're selfish. Self-centered people produce a self that they hate. They do what they like and they hate what they do. And they're like a Christmas package. It's all wrapped up, but it never is used. Nobody does a thing with it. Now, here's our first problem. We're born dead to God in the Spirit and self-centered. The second problem is this. I was created to have my mind, will, and emotions in touch with reality. To have it in touch with God. So think of your mind, will, and emotions like an automobile. If you see a car coming towards you with no driver in it, what are you going to do? Get out of the way, right. Even if it's coming straight towards you, you're getting out of the way if there's no driver. If it's swerving, it's more obvious you ought to get out of the way. If it's rolling and burning and rolling and coming towards you, you know you got to get out of the way. My mind, will, and emotions are like an automobile. They're created to be under the influence of God. The technical definition of sanity is this: to have your mind, will, and emotions in touch with reality. Insanity is to have my mind, will, and emotions out of touch with reality. So what is your condition at birth if you're dead to God in the Spirit? You're born out of touch with reality, so what's your condition at birth? You're insane. So I wanted you to all come here today so I could tell you you're crazy. Now, insanity is a relative term. And people say, oh, no, I'm not insane. How many of you have had this happen? You drive along in your car and you have a discussion with someone who isn't there. Well, if they say this, I'll say that. If they say this, I'll come back with that. Well, I'll get them with that, all right. You ever do that? Now, just start having that discussion as you walk around. Have it out loud while you're eating and see what people do with you. They'll come and send the fellows with the white coats because that is absolutely insane. Here's my point. Do you judge your thoughts and emotions? Where do your thoughts come from? When you have a thought, is it God's thought? Is it Satan's thought? Is it your conscience? Is it your mind? Have you ever wondered where your thoughts come from? Whose are they? Now I'm going to tell you a secret. Satan always speaks to you in the first person singular with an Australian accent. He speaks to you in the first person singular with a Canadian accent. He speaks to you in the first person singular with an American accent. He wants to confuse his voice with my voice. Now, if I walked up to some of you fellows here and I said to you, how can you stand your girlfriend? And you'd never met me. I said, that is one mean woman. That's an ugly woman. She doesn't have any kind of a countenance at all. How do you stand her? How do you put up with her? You deserve more than that. What would you fellas do? Yeah, I think you'd hit me. I don't think you'd grab my hand and go, thank you, I'm glad you made that observation. I think you'd probably hit me. Do you think that Satan walks up to you and he says this: you're worthless, you're no good, you're a failure, you'll never go anywhere, you've bottomed out, how can you stand that person? He doesn't do that. He comes walking behind me in a first person singular voice that sounds exactly like mine. And he says, I am worthless. And I turn around and look and I don't see anyone. I go, oh yeah, I'm worthless. Life will never work out for me. Oh yeah, it's not going to work out for me. And you begin to receive his voice as your voice, never judging the thoughts. Now here's what Satan wants you to think. That temptation equals desire. Excuse me. Does temptation equal desire? He wants you to believe that temptation equals desire. So I'm asking you the question, does temptation equal desire? If you're tempted in something, is that a revelation of your heart and the kind of person you are? Is it? If temptation does equal desire, then the most wicked man that ever lived would be the man that would be tempted the most. Who was tempted the most? Jesus. So temptation doesn't equal desire, is that right? So we all agree on that? Then how many of you would stand up in church and say, oh, I had a funny little temptation this week. I had this temptation to sleep with the pastor. It's a little temptation. Yeah, it was just a funny thought. It just came, go to bed with the pastor. Would you do that? No, you wouldn't. Why wouldn't you? Because you believe that temptation does equal desire. And the people around you believe that temptation equals desire. Now, we've bought into that lie. And since we think that temptation equals desire, and we have this terrible temptation, we begin to make the temptation the whole focus of my life. It actually becomes my obsession, this temptation. And the more I look at it, the bigger it gets. Now imagine this, that this room represents your whole life. Everything in here is a part of you. All of it is a part of your being. All of it is a part of your experience. Everything in this room is attached to something in your past. How many of you noticed this pen up here? Nobody saw it? How many cubic centimeters does it take up? Almost nothing, right? It's insignificant. It's not a thing. But as I pick it up and move it towards me, it's getting bigger and bigger. Well, I'll just keep obsessing on it. Now, how big is it? Well, it's kind of annoying, but I think I can cope. It's only half of my life. And now it's moved over here. Oh, man, this is disgusting. I don't think I can go on. I don't want to keep talking to people. I don't want to keep lecturing. I can't even see who you are anymore. I don't know who you are. I can't stand this. I can't see my food. I can't drive anymore. I'm going to kill myself. That's what I'll do. I'll just kill myself because I can't stand this. Do you know what you should do? This belongs over there. But if I pick something up and move it towards me, it becomes bigger than it really is. And I began to obsess on that. And I wonder, how am I going to get free from that? It begins to consume all of my life. And before you know it, something that was in a corner, that was a little small, insignificant thing, is now taking over my whole life. Do you know, I've been delivered from 100 things. God set me free from hundreds of things, and He has never once set me free from anything I obsessed on. It won't happen. There's two ways for an alcoholic to be controlled by alcohol. One's getting it, the other's staying away from it, but either way, it's the focus of my life, and I won't be set free. I remember one time that I told my wife, I said, listen, I'm too critical, I'm too negative, I'm too judgmental. I'm going to overcome that. It isn't right in the Christian life. I got to overcome that. So I bought some books on it. I read it. I did the Bible studies. I looked up the passages, memorized the right ones. Got done. I was still critical and negative. So I told her, listen, I'm going to go on a 40-day fast. I'm going to fast until God delivers me from being a slanderer and negative and critical. So I went on the fast. I got done. I waited a couple months. I was in the same shape. I said, all right, I'm going on another fast. The Lord didn't hear me. I'm going to get over this. I'm going to get free from this thing. It is not going to continue to control my life. I'm not going to do it. I'm going to get free. So I went on this other fast. At the end of that 6-month period of me working, I was the skinniest slanderer you've ever met. The skinniest critical person you'd ever met. But I wasn't free from a thing. You can't get free from the thing that you focus on. You can't move a problem this way and move Christ at the back and expect to have freedom. And when you see a problem in a person's life, if you want to make sure that they never get free from that problem, just move it in front of them. Just keep mentioning it to them. Just make it the focus of their life, and they will never, never be free. You won't be free from the thing you obsess on. I want everyone in this room to think of a pink elephant with black polka dots. You got it? Now, the first one to forget it, raise your hand. Well, if you raise your hand, we're going to check your pulse. There's a story of a fellow who went into South India. He was a magician. He told all the people that he could create gold in a tub of water. So the women brought him out a tub of water. It was filtered water. It had to be pure. The pan had to be just right, all those kind of things. And he begins to stir the water with his stick, and he pours in a potion that turns the water black. And as the water goes black, through sleight of hand, he drops in some gold nuggets, and he begins to stir. When he gets all done, he steps back and he says, "Dump the water." So they dump the water on cheesecloth, and there's gold. One of the money changers looked at that and said, "Can I buy that formula?" The fellow said, "Yeah, it's 50,000 rupees. So he gave him the 50,000 rupees. The magician wrote out the formula. He handed it to the fellow. And as the fellow's walking off with his formula, really happy to have it, the magician cries out to him, "Listen, there's one thing you need to know. I forgot to write it down. It's not a big deal, but I just want to remind you of it. It's a real simple thing. But if you do what I'm telling you not to do, you'll never be able to make gold." And the money changer said, "What is it?" And he said, "It's real simple. Just remember, when you're pouring in the potion and stirring with the stick, and the water's going black, never, never, never think of the red-faced monkey." Do you know the story goes that he went mad trying to get the red-faced monkey out of his mind? He absolutely went crazy trying to be set free from the red-faced monkey. You will not get set free from the thing that you focus on. Satan wants me to believe that temptation equals desire, so I'll begin to focus on the temptation and obsess on it. And in the end, here's what he'll whisper to me: "Well, you're going to have to sin to get over it. You might as well just go ahead and do it and stop the struggle and just move into it, or you're never going to get over this conflict." Now, he loves that because he doesn't care if you sin. Sin lasts for an instant, but guilt can last a lifetime, and we're going to talk about that. But then the next point is, I'll just sin and fall into it, and I'll be done with this struggle between temptation and desire. There's only two types of people that have anything at all to do with sheep: shepherds and butchers. The butcher's voice is harsh and critical and driving and condemning and judgmental, and there's never a center to it. The shepherd's voice is light and life and liberty and freeing. And do you know that whenever the shepherd convicts you, there's a lift in your spirit, because with his light comes the might. God only convicts you of the things he's going to free you from. And if he's convicting you of something, get your eyes on him. Get excited about it, because God convicts us of the things he's going to free us from. And as we sit here this morning, I'd ask you this: whose voice do you listen to? Is it harsh, critical, driving, condemning, and judgmental when it comes to you? What kind of thoughts do you have about yourself and about others? Are they light, life, liberty, and freeing? Do you judge your thoughts and begin to say to those thoughts, "I reject you because I know the source and where it comes from. I'm not going to traffic in that anymore"? There's a place in Denver where I get my hair cut, and it's one of these places where they got about 20 chairs on each side of the wall, and you go in and you pay $5 or $6. It's kind of an assembly line. You could tell that by looking at my hair. But I go in there, it's quick, you get it over with. And I was thinking one day about this idea of judging our thoughts. Where do our thoughts come from? So the lady put me in her chair and put the little towel around my head, and she started to trim it in the back. And I said, "Could I ask you a question?" She said, "Sure." "How many heads of hair have you cut today?" She said, "I think you're like number 20, 22. She was the manager. So she'd been doing them every 30 minutes for 12 hours, all day long. I said, "Well, when you've been cutting hair all day like that, one person after the other, do you ever have the thought come into your mind when you're holding your scissors, just jab them in his neck?" Do you ever have that kind of a thought, just jam them into his neck? And she stopped cutting and turned around and came around the front and said, "I do. I do have that thought." I said, well, you're not having it now, are you? She said, no. And I said, you know, that's the enemy. When you hear that voice, you don't want to give in to that voice. The enemy loves to bring a shocking thought that is totally contrary to your nature to get your eyes off of Christ and onto Him. So if I see you walking down a path and I want to stop you and get your attention, what gets your attention the most? Throwing a leaf at you or hit you upside the head with a board? I'll hit you up with the most shocking thought you can have. And the idea then is to get your focus off of Him and onto the shocking thought. So a lady comes to my office, she's in a sweat, she's panicking, having anxiety attacks, because all the way over, every time she puts her child in the car seat, she has a thought, open the door and push the baby out. Open the door and push the baby out. Now she can barely cope because she's afraid she's going to open the door and push the baby out. Now, if her child were a teenager, that might make a little more sense, but it's just a little baby. Open the door and push him out. The very fact that she reacts so violently to it is proof it's not her thought. How do you know who you are? You don't know who you are through your temptations. Your true nature, your true character is not revealed in temptation, but in struggle. Struggle reveals who you really are. So, I'll prove it to you. For the next week, I want all the men in the room to wear women's clothes. I want you to wear women's undergarments. I want you to put on makeup. I want you to have a wig. We expect you to come here in high heels. We want you to go to all the women's events and activities, all of those kind of things. How comfortable will you be? Now, there may be the odd person out in here going, oh, that's a great assignment. I'm happy for that. Always wanted to do that. Haven't done that since I was little. You can have that kind of a person. But generally, how are you going to like doing that? You've got to walk around in a dress. Would you enjoy that? Would it be a struggle to do it? Why is it a struggle? Women put on those clothes and it's not a struggle for them. Unless it's right after Christmas. Not a worry. They don't struggle. Why do you struggle with women's clothes on? Because it goes against your nature. The struggle reveals your nature. You shouldn't have on women's clothes. You ought to have on men's clothes because you're a man. The struggle reveals who you are. And one day you'll have a little awakening. And you'll wake up in the morning and in the corner of the room, you'll see your past, you'll see your failures, you'll see your sins, you'll see your habits, you'll see your depression, and you'll look at those things, and here's what will go through your mind. I could put those things on today, and I'd still go to heaven. But it's too much of a struggle because it doesn't suit me. I'm a child of God. It doesn't suit me. All of life has been teaching me that it doesn't suit me to wear those things. And one of the things that we've got to learn is come to the place where we look at our sins, we look at our past, we look at our habits, and we say, listen, I can put that on. I know I'll still go to heaven. God will forgive me. Scripture's clear on that. But it doesn't suit me anymore. It doesn't fit me. I was standing in the airport in London, coat and tie on, briefcase, the rest of the businessman. We're standing there, and here comes this young lady wearing a gownless evening strap. She goes walking past us, and this businessman leans over, and he hits me on the shoulder and says, how would you like to spend the night with her? He's just making a comment. I said, it wouldn't suit me. And he moves away. I said, I'm not gay. That's a beautiful and attractive woman. But I wouldn't feel happy the next day. There wouldn't be a lift in my spirit. It wouldn't suit me. It doesn't fit me. The struggle reveals who you are. If you're struggling with pushing your little baby out the door, it means you don't want to push her out the door. But it does mean this: you've bought into the idea that temptation equals desire and is a revelation of you. It's not a revelation of you. It's a revelation of the person that brought the temptation. And it says everything about his character, but not anything about yours. there would be very few young men today, because of what's going on in society, that haven't had a homosexual thought, because the enemy would tempt people in that. But if you want to obsess on it and put it underneath a magnifying glass, it grows and it gets worse and worse and worse. I remember a fellow that I was counseling, and he told me when he was in 7th grade, which would be around age 12 for us, he was making fun of the homosexuals with some of the other fellows in the hall. He went into the classroom, and the teacher makes this statement: any people who make fun of homosexuals are really homosexuals themselves. That's why they make fun, because they're struggling with it themselves. Well, this boy was obsessive. He was a high thinker in personality. He moved it towards him, and he started obsessing on it. Now, the next week, one of the other boys came to class and said, I told my dad what you said about anybody who was making fun of homosexuals was a homosexual, and he'll be down here tonight to talk to you. And the fellow goes, oh, well, that's not exact. That wasn't really what I meant. That wouldn't carry through. That wouldn't be true. Of course it's not true. But the thing is, it already set this boy on an obsession. We have to come to the place where we judge our temptations and know it's a revelation of the enemy more than it is us. If we don't judge our thoughts, the next thing we haven't judged are our emotions. An emotion has at its roots, and we can take the emotion of guilt, it can have at its roots something that's true or false, and it feels exactly the same way. True guilt and false guilt feel exactly the same way. How do you distinguish between true guilt and false guilt? True guilt's for true sin. If you kill somebody, you ought to feel guilty about it. If you do something wrong, you ought to feel guilty. Guilt cuts me off from God, it makes me miserable, and it drives me back to Him. It's a tool in His hand to move me back toward Him. If you confess something the first time you confessed it to God, every time you've confessed it since then, you've been confessing it to the enemy, not God. If we only accomplish one thing this week, I'd be happy with this: if you don't confess your sins twice. If He didn't hear you the first time, He's not going to hear you the 5,000th time. And the enemy's got people who I know, one lady in particular that I saw, who for 80 years, she was 94 when I saw her, had been confessing the same sin over and over and over again, a past event. Well, that's enough of that. It's bad enough that we did it, but now it's the obsession with our life. It's a false guilt issue. Very few people will judge any of their emotions. Now, God either forgives you or He doesn't forgive you. I had a fellow recently in the office, and he told me everything that was wrong with his wife. So I said, this is really good stuff. Hang on, I want to write it on my whiteboard. So I put wife, and then I wrote everything she did wrong. All of the things she had, and we went on and on. And I looked at him when we got done, and I said, you know, brother, I didn't just fall off a turnip truck. I understand those different issues. We can work through those. I want to talk to you about them. But here's another issue, and I drew a line, and I put Jesus. Let's talk about Him for just a minute. He says, well, what about Him? I said, brother, I know things about you, you don't think I know. I know you've had an affair. And he just turned pale. He said, how do you know that? And I said, I just know, and that's not all I know. I know you struggle with pornography, and I know your drinking problem. And he just sat there. And I said, I also know that you hated it all while you did it. You despise every bit of that in your life. And we have a policy when we disciple people. If you hate your sin, we love you. But if you love your sin, I'll hate you. And I know you hate your sin, so I want you to know I love you. And I also want you to know this. When you confess those things, He forgave you because you live under the law of liberty. James 2:12, live as those that are going to be judged under the law of liberty. And you know what the law of liberty is? The law of liberty is the law that says I can be forgiven 7 times 70. That many times I can go to God and be forgiven 7 times 70. It's an amazing thing. Don't think you're not forgiven when you confess it the first time. Do you remember when the Romans scourged somebody? They had a whip with 12 leather straps, embedded pieces of pottery, glass, metal, whatever they had in the strips. On the end was a hook. They gave you 39 lashes across the back. The last lash came over your face and ripped it away. So you were disfigured beyond recognition. Do you remember Jesus appearing to the disciples and they didn't know who he was? That's because he was marred. And he said, put your hands in here and touch my hand and touch my side. Do you know that for all of eternity, I don't know what it cost Jesus to become a man, but for the rest of eternity, he's a man in heaven with those marks. Marred beyond recognition. Revelation says he's a slain lamb in heaven. Seated right now at the right hand of the Father is the marred Jesus. God can never forget man, and he says, ask whatever you want in my name, and you'll receive it. So as you ask for forgiveness, and God looks to his right hand, and he sees the man there that's marred beyond recognition, do you think you're going to get it? Of course you've got it. It's the law of liberty. And I explained that to this fellow and said, isn't it wonderful? He said, it's the most wonderful news I've heard. I'm under the law of liberty. I said, well, brother, then what would be wrong with bringing this person under the law of liberty? Live as those that are judged by that law. Why don't we wipe this out instead of spending 6 months on it? Bring her under the law of liberty. You've been brought under the law of liberty. I know a fellow who was jumped by a gang, beat senseless, left for dead. He went into a coma. He came out of it. They didn't think he would. He came out 6 weeks after he was beat. He can't remember anything the 6 weeks previous. He'll never be able to smell or taste again. And they're having a real problem bringing these fellows to justice. It's a gang. And every time I'm around him, I get mad over what happened to him. I just get furious. And I ask him, well, how's it going, and what are they going to do to him, and where's the justice, and what's happening? And he sits there, and his countenance never changes, and he says, do you have any more potatoes? And he'll just eat them. And finally, one day I said to him, I said, how come you're not as mad as I am? Well, he said, Mike, here's the problem. If I see these fellows, and they needed petrol for their car, I'd give it to them. If they needed money for lunch, I'd give it to them. Whatever they needed, I'd give it to them, because he says, see, here's the problem. I can't even help the police. I can't remember anything 6 weeks before or after. Here's the thing people don't understand. You can't be vindictive when you can't remember. And he said that, and the first thing that came into my mind was this: and I will remember your sins no more. Isn't that great that God's got a wiped mind? That when we confess those things, he makes them as white as snow. That he remembers those things no more. Well, if he remembers them no more, what are you doing remembering them? It's the enemy bringing them up. We're not going to listen to what he brings up to us. We have to judge our thoughts and emotions. Now imagine right now a mountain lion comes in this room. It's escaped from the zoo, it breaks in the glass, and it races over and it grabs Ray. Now that's a little unrealistic because lions don't like Irishmen, but let's just say for a minute that they did. As it races towards Ray, is it all right if Ray has a panic attack? Is it? Is it all right if Ray gets depressed as it eats him? Is it? And then as all of us sort of move toward this door and lock him in and escape, can Ray get mad at us? Yeah, that makes sense, and I'll preach at his funeral and say, you wouldn't have believed Ray. I don't know where his spirituality went. He panicked, he got depressed, he was mad at us. And his wife would say, why? And I'd say, because we ran out. Well, that makes sense. But what doesn't make sense is for Ray to sit there in his chair, have a panic attack, get depressed, get angry, and then go get in a car and go look for a mountain lion. That's insane. That's crazy. But many of us wake up in the morning, we stand at the foot of the bed, we feel worthless, unacceptable, no good, confused, the world's not going to work out, everything's wrong, nobody likes me, and we walk out into the world waiting for something to happen to prove it. How long does it take for something to happen to prove that? Not very long, does it? You've got the emotions and you're looking for the fact. You haven't judged your emotions. So imagine you're at the bottom of the mountain. You turn around and there's a bear. He takes a swipe and the back of your pants go. And you look at the top and there's a cabin. If I run as fast as I can get there. And every once in a while I trip. I smell the bear. I can hear him. He claws at me. I run. I finally make it into the cabin. I slam the door. I put down a bar and I hear the bear hit the door and fall backwards. Then I look out the window and I see the bear go off. What do I do next? Just start whistling, oh, what a friend we have in Jesus, and just giggle and all that? Is that what you do? You stay up against the wall going, oh, oh, oh. Now, you're safe. Your mind tells you you're safe. You know you're safe in that room, but what do your emotions tell you? You're going to die any minute. At some point in that little cabin, you've got to say no to your lying emotions. They were true for a while. They served their purpose, but now they've become a lie. You've got to say no to them, or you'll die in that cabin, and you'll never leave and know your freedom.